Hello, I'm Angela Peoples, and today I'm going to present to you the considerations for ELL evaluation. The first question we're going to answer is, students may speak with dialects and differences related to their culture. How can these differences impact assessment approaches in oral language? The first thing is you have to be careful when you're selecting an assessment to use because we have to watch for bias in it. A lot of if you're looking through the questions and you see that it's not going to be good for an ELL student, you just need to throw that one out, eliminate the test, and substitute another one. If you can possibly use informal procedures, this isn't always possible because I know sometimes you need that comparative data and you need to look at the norm. So if this is the case, you have two options. And the first one is to get a group, just renorm a group with those members that speak that type of dialect or language. But this is very impractical and very expensive to try and do. So the second option they say is the gold standard for the assessments. And this is to do one test just as the test is written with the norms that they are. Then redo another test, but consider the different rules of that dialect. And then if they answer correctly based on those rules, then you answer it correctly. For instance, I'm talking about like some of the rules are lessening the L sound or at the end, weakening those final consonants. So that can be a problem so you have to know those rules as you're taking those tests. But that's the best option is to take two. Don't ignore or penalize a student for the dialect or how they speak. So it's kind of good because then you could see proficiency in both those tests. What intervention options are available to students who are English language learners if they need additional services? The first thing I want to mention is that if the kids are in ELL, they can still qualify for special education. So that's one thing I found out because I have an English ELL student living in my home for me. So I wasn't quite sure how that worked, but even if they're in ELL, they could still qualify for special education. Another thing is use real life experiences when you're discussing reading materials in class. Bring it to where they can understand by using those concrete examples, things that they can relate to as you're giving the lessons. Another consideration or intervention is to give them more time to finish an assignment. It's going to take them longer because they're trying to learn the language and so giving them a little bit more time to get the assignment done is a good thing. Another option would be to pair your ELL student with an older or gifted student that speaks the same language, and they can be like a peer mentor to them, which is, as research has proven, that that's a good way for kids to learn through peer tutoring. Another option is read texts in both the English and non-English language. So as they're reading both, it kind of helps them to see exactly what maybe the concept or what the material is trying to get across, because they understand exactly in their language, but then they also read it in English. Another and really important one I think about, if our students in gen ed class learn with manipulatives and hands-on to help build that background knowledge, how much more do ELL students need to have that? So as much as we can, use manipulatives in class, use materials, hands-on stuff that the kids can actually see and learn, and it'll help with that background knowledge that some of those kids that are ELL are missing. So those are some interventions you can try to help these students. Why are students who are culturally and linguistically over-identified for special education services? What they say is ELL and a disability look so similar that they can be over-identified as needing special education services because it looks so similar. sometimes, like we talked about before, the tools that assess these kids are not up to par, so they can get over identified for special education. A lot of times their schooling can be interrupted, and that can cause them to be behind in some areas because maybe they've moved from another, they could have been moving from out of the country into the country. And so there's been an interruption in their schooling, so that can be a problem. Sometimes just the negative expectation of these students, people can then over-identify them for special ed. So it's important to look at each student. It doesn't matter where they come from. You need to believe that they are able and expect them to do well. And the other one is not appropriate instruction and cultural needs being met for these students. So a lot of times, and I know I can mention this in the next slide as well, but there's not a lot of teachers that are bilingual. And if we had more of those, it would help, because then they could understand exactly what these students are saying or what they're really grasping. So those are some reasons why kids are over-identified. Now, why are students under-identified for special education services? A lot of times there's a high rate of retention for these kids. And so another reason is because what I said before, the language differences look the same as a disability. So they may very well have a disability, but because they're an ELL student, they are figuring that it is the language that is causing them to be behind, rather than maybe they have dyslexia or something else. So teachers are discouraged to refer. This is something interesting that I found out just in my research, that a lot of times there's an unwritten rule that you do not refer an ELL student until they've been in ELL for at least 3 years. And this is kind of concerns me, because what if this kid really does have a disability and we are just not even referring them for that service, if that service is what that kiddo needs to help them. Again, not enough bilingual special educators. So many of these apply for both. And then trying to learn English is a big task. And then they're also in the classroom. So they can be under-identified for special ed because they're saying they're just struggling to learn the language, but that's not always the case. Here is my page of references that I've looked up for this presentation. Thank you for taking time to listen.